1965, when Gordon Moore first expressed the so-called law. It's not a law, just an observation based on 3 data points, by the way. The fact there was one. That was also the year I made my very first computer graphics. We're now, in 2010, the Moore's Law factor hit 1 billion. In other words, in 2010, anything good about computers was 1 billion times more than what it was in 1965. In 1965, it was already 1 million times more than it was in 1948. So that's 1 million, billion, what's that, quadrillion? 2010, we got 1 quadrillion improvement over a year. These numbers are silly numbers. We can't think them. The only way you know what it is to get there and see what it was like. I call it the order of magnitude problem. That's why I use the word order of magnitude instead of factor 10. Order of magnitude is not just a factor 10. It's not just math. It feels different. You have to think differently for each order of magnitude step. You have to reconceptualize everything. You can't think about the next order of magnitude until you're there, usually. If you can think beyond 1 order of magnitude, you'll probably become a billionaire. It's just one of those things that gives you an extra level. So what I want to do is step through Moore's Law, of course, based on what I know best, which is the history of computer graphics, namely the group called Pixar. You'll go to Xerox PARC, New York Tech on Long Island. So Xerox PARC is at the first factor 10, Moore's Law at 10. New York Tech is at Moore's Law 100, Lucasfilm, Moore's Law 1000, and so forth. We started at Capital, and I started at Pixar at Moore's Law 10,000x. And I guess I should get up here once. There's nothing to stop this law, despite it. I hear its death prophesied every day, but I've been hearing that for decades. Once engineers get to the next order of magnitude, they figure out another way to get to the next order of magnitude. So even Gordon Moore himself came out a couple of years ago and said, well, we got at least 10 more years out of this. That's at least 100x because they're going 3D on the chips. So by 2025, we should hit trillion-x. Try to think, instead of thinking in terms of trillion, what does that mean? 1,000x more than today. What can you do with 1,000x more? That's your homework, son. It's hard. All right, so it's probably hard for many of you to see, but I've got the Moore's Law factor in the lower left corner of each slide, and sort of a year range in the lower right corner. But what I want to show you, I want to take a quick trip through that curve I just showed you. This wasn't very long ago so it was 67 years ago, the first pixel was 1 bit, 32 by 32 image. Yeah. All right, this is in the early 70s. I joined a buddy of mine, Vic Schaub, at Xerox PARC, this place you may have heard of. This was its heyday. This was when the personal computer was being invented. The mouse was being mastered. The Windows-based operating systems were invented. Ethernet, called the Ethernet, was in use amongst all our machines. Dick and I were doing color graphics, the first color graphics. So this, what you're looking at, is the first 8-bit color picture on a computer. Well, it's actually one of them. Dick built a piece of hardware called SuperPaint and wrote the software for it. And I was hired as an artist to come in and show off this new artistic machine because he had written the paint program. And the very first thing I did, and I did, by the way, I'm going to show you this horribly crude videotape I made. Bits of it. So my first, let's call it serious contribution was the RGB to HFB color transform, which, much to my amazement, is still in use. I came into Dick and I said, you know, we artists don't think in terms of RGB for mixing colors. So we choose a hue and we lighten it with a white and we darken it with black, say. What's the transform? And Dick said, oh, there isn't one. So I went home that night and invented it. One of the very low-hanging, easy fruits. All right, I won't make you suffer. It's very hard. You just see how far we've come so fast. Oh, we thought this stuff was cool. Nobody had ever, there was no color graphics that drove us. And by the way, this is all at what we call video resolution, which of course means old-fashioned video. So roughly 500 by 500. Not high def, in other words. All right, let's do we had one more turn of another turn of Moore's Law. 100x, we're now 100x. We're at a place called L.A.S.T. Institute of Technology out on Long Island. And by the way, Xerox card, you've all heard these stories, but I will tell you my version is they fired me. One day my boss called me and he said, they fired me. I said, well, why? He said, well, we decided not to do color. I said, but the future's color and you own it completely. They had the only color in the world, right? And he said, that may be true, but it's a corporate decision that we're going to go black and white. So, okay, bye. So we went to, my buddy David DeFrancisco and I heard about this place on Long Island run by a crazy man named Alexander Schur. He had his, despite the name, it was a diploma mill at the time. I think New York Tech is now a reasonable institution, but at the time it was just a diploma mill for kids who lived on Long Island with their parents and couldn't get into other colleges. Didn't matter. It was located in fabulous, beautiful North Shore of Long Island, Great Gatsby land, estates everywhere. Alexander Schur put together 4 estates, and the mansions on the estates were the buildings on his campus. So, for example, the lower right is the Visaversky mansion, was where we had our video lab, was in that mansion. And the upper left was the Holloway House, that's where a bunch of us lived for free. And lower left was where David and I and Garland Stern lived. It was the chauffeur's quarters on David Rockefeller's wife's family estate. I was pinching myself every day, I couldn't believe it. It felt like a movie. But importantly, in the upper right is the garage of yet another mansion called Gary House that was the computer graphics lab. The group now known as Pixar started there. Our joke is we got started in the garage. It just happened to be 4-car garage. And most important thing about, okay, we had nothing to do with the school. It was just the madman who owned the school saw himself as the next Walt Disney. He had a full animation studio on the campus of the old-fashioned cell animation, ink and paint on celluloid type. They were making a movie called Tubby the Tuba. And Dr. Schur's idea was, if we could program these computers and fire all the people and just make the money. We say, no, don't even say that. It's not true. We don't know how to make the art. We can take away a lot of the grunge work. But he made this movie, Tubby the Tuba, which I doubt any of you have ever heard of. It was horrible. I went to the screening in Manhattan, and it was so embarrassing. Some of us went to sleep on the front row, and some of us, just couldn't. Anyhow, one of the animators came up afterwards and said, I've just wasted 2 years of my life. But I wanted to show you some of these early computer graphic images. So Alex Schur, he may have been crazy, but he bought us everything we asked for. In particular, we had the second. So Dick Schaap had built the first video resolution 8-bit deep frame buffer, picture memory, graphics card, size of the refrigerator. At Xerox PARC, it had 256 colors. So Dr. Schur would come by in his inevitable way and say, well, what do we need to do to stay ahead? And I said, well, if you buy me 2 more of these things, by the way, the first one that he bought cost $80,1975. Buy me 2 more of those, I can gang them together. I had to explain what RGB meant. gang these together, and we'll have 24 bits per pixel, and we'll have 16 million colors, and we can do anything. A couple of weeks later, he comes back and says, you know, I bought you 5 more of those things you asked for. So you had 2 of those RGB things you were talking about. So we had the very first RGB full color in the world. And these are some of my colleagues and I, everybody, all of us thought we were artists of some sort or another, so these are some of the pieces that we made. Point at it. This one I actually used to win a huge patent case to save Photoshop from a British company. We started experimenting with pictures that were larger than a frame buffer, 1,000 by 1,000 pixels by 24 bits deep. I should go back to New York Tech. I met Ed Catmull there, who would later start Pixar with me, and he and I invented this thing there called Alpha Channel. So we had transparency of each pixel as well as color. Now here's oh, thank you. Here's another one of these wonderful early animations, showing some of the first animations from the group now known as Pixar. I'm going to go through this fast because they're very crude. All right, enough. It's horrible. One of the best things that happened to me here was Ed Imstroller showed up one day, a world-class artist, and he had a Guggenheim. So he walked into the garage that I showed you, the 4-car garage, and announced that he had this Guggenheim, and he was going to make a movie with us, a 3-hour movie with us. And we started laughing. And he said, well, you'll be lucky. He had 6 months. Lucky in 6 months if you got 3 minutes done. It's the world. Sooner or later, that's true. But right now, we're here on Moore's Law. We're not there. It's very slow and painful. Anyhow, that's him on the right, by the way, the guy with the black hair. He and I worked very tightly together to make a piece I'm very proud of called Sunstone, which is now in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And I'll step through it too. Nope, well. Very little 3D with this. They're still very expensive and slow. Sorry. And then here was our 3D. It's also anti-alias. This was a huge problem. There's no jaggies on these edges. Getting rid of the jagged, people thought for a long time that jagged edges were the only thing that computers could do, so we were out to prove that wasn't true. All right, come on. Now we've leapt forward to 1000X. This is at Lucasfilm. We finally figured out that Alexander Schur could make movies. Thought he was horrible. And George Lucas suddenly knocked on our door and said, I'm John. Actually, Francis Coppola called one day and George Lucas the next day. Not themselves, they're people. And said, come join us in California. And I didn't trust the guy from Coppola, even though I think he's the greater director by far. So blew him off, and we went with George Lucas. And so this is an early photograph of the group. I'm the guy with the shutter, and on my right, on my right is Ed Catmull, who is the co-founder with me. On my left is this new kid that Ed and I had just found at Disney and hired him to do on Lassiter. And there's a lot of Academy Awards represented by the various people in this picture. I do want to point out Sam Leffler on the right. He co-wrote Berkeley Unix with Bill Joy, but nobody knows his name. He was our secret weapon. Then we got the big break. Kept waiting for George Lucas to show up and say, be in our movie, be in my next movie. And he never showed up. And all of a sudden it dawned on me, he didn't get it. We saw ourselves as creators of content. We could do the hardware and software, they'll pay our way in, earn our way in, but we were there to make content. And he never came and asked us. To him, we were just the nerds, the droids, and his artistic people were the ones that could make content. But one day, Paramount Pictures showed up to use Industrial Light and Magic, the special effects house at Lucasfilm, to make special effects for this new movie, Star Trek II: Wrath of Khan. And they called me over, and they wanted to put some of this newfangled computer graphics into the movie. And they said, well, we don't do that, but the guys next door, they went, our group. That's what they did, we think. They called me over, and they ran by an idea, and it was just so, it was impossible for us to do that, for one thing. But I just blurted out, I said, do you guys have any idea what you can ask of us? And they said, no. I said, well, let me design a shot tonight that will satisfy the parameters of your movie, and bring it back to me tomorrow. And they went, okay. So I walked out of there, I'd like to try to convey this, I walked out of there about this high off the ground. Because this was it, this is the big break, right? A major motion picture studio had just handed me the rights to create a scene in a major motion picture. So, needless to say, it was a sleepless night. But I came in, landed the shot, and it's called the Genesis demo, Star Trek II. Before I run it, I'd like to say something, because if you won't see it unless I tell you, and when I tell you, you probably cannot not see it. One of my stars is Lauren Carpenter, who had mastered fractals and efficient. His software would render fractals efficiently on the core computers at the time. Fractals are a way of generating natural things, but it has an element of randomness in it. So sure enough, he generated some mountains. You can see them in the lower right with fractals, but he didn't know exactly where the tops were. And the shot is based on the idea of a spacecraft flying around an Earth-like, moon-like planet, melting its surface and changing it into an Earth-like planet. This is the Genesis demo, creates life from death. And the spacecraft ran into the mountains. So Lauren had to go in by hand and find the one frame where the spacecraft hit the mountain, part of the notch in the mountain. So look for that.
It is our intention to introduce the Genesis device into a pre-selected area of a lifeless space body, a moon or other dead form. The device is delivered, instantaneously causing what we call the Genesis effect. Matter is reorganized with life-generating
This is a
cells.
video resolution, by the way, not movie.
Instead of a dead moon, a living, breathing planet capable of sustaining whatever life forms we see fit to deposit on it. The default moon simulated here represents the least fraction of the Genesis.
Enough of that. So when I called the group in, I'm going to get out of here. Let's back up a minute on that shot. When I called my group together to execute, tell them we won the deal, we had a big break in the movie business, I said, we're going to do a great job for Paramount. It's going to make sense, storytelling sense, make them happy. But what this really is a 60-second commercial to George Lucas. so they'll know what the hell he's got. And I knew one thing, I had some secret knowledge about George. I knew how he watched movies. It's something that I can tell you, but it's very hard to do. He is focused on what the camera does. He does not get sucked into the emotion of the film, which means the director has failed. If we're not sucked into the emotion of the film, the director's failed. George is able to look by that, look past that, and stay focused on the cameraman's move. So I knew this, and I said, we're going to put a camera shot in this shot, a camera move in this shot that'll blow his socks off, because he'll know that no real camera could possibly have done a shot. It won't be gratuitous 3D, it'll make perfect storytelling and narrative sense. I hope you weren't paying attention to the camera there, for example. And it worked. The next day after the premiere, George, shy guy, stepped 1 foot in my office and he went, great camera movement. He was out there. And we were in this next movie, and more importantly, we're in his buddy Spielberg's next movie. Okay, so Ed and I are coming back from SIGGRAPH, the Big Annual Computer Graphics Conference, the 83 conference. On the way back, he said, you know, the next SIGGRAPH, we need to tell the world that we can do character animation. No more of this flying logos, commercial shots. We can do characters, animate them, which is what, you know, we had been inspired to make the first movie by those guys out on Long Island who were doing Tubby the Tuba. They showed us the ropes of how to make character animated movies. And we knew how to do it. We knew just a matter of Moore's Law time. We would have computers fast enough to do it. We didn't want to take 20 years. That's what we did. But we had the vision out on Long Island to be the first team to have the first to put the computer. But we needed to, you know, get there step by step. We needed to show the world that we could do character animation using computers. So, I mean to sit down and go storyboard for what I call my breakfast with Andre, because we were all in love with this movie, my dinner with Andre at the time. And it was going to star an android named Andre. We would wake up in a beautiful scene and get up and stretch and yawn, and that was it. That was it was a terrible story. But luckily, and we were also going to show that we had solved motion blur. If in an animation, if each frame is exactly still, you get this horrible juddering effect. It's like the equivalent of jaggies in a still frame. And we knew that if we had to solve that problem, or we would never break into the big time. And with this movie, we were announcing to the world that we had solved it. Two of our guys, Rob Cook and Lauren Carpenter in particular, nailed it with one of those beautiful solutions of all times. I won't go into that, but you can see in the lower left frame on the right side, that's one frame. We brought a Cray supercomputer to its knees computing that one frame. We were so proud of it, and then we realized it didn't matter. Oh, and it didn't finish the frame. So it doesn't matter. Nobody's going to notice. Okay. Find this stuff here. There we go. So John took my crummy story and turned it into his story, where he has changed the android into this cute little whatever it is, and introduced a second character whose name had to be Wally B, since Wallace Shawn was the co-star of my dinner with Andre. So this is John, the director of this piece, and John L.A.S.T. This is his first computer animation for real. We've done a test or two before. All right, another big break. So this is all still happening at Lucasfilm. I guess I should tell you how Ed and I found John L.A.S.T. We always thought Walt Disney would be our savior. We couldn't understand why this crazy guy on Long Island was the money and now George Lucas was the money. Where was Disney, the great animation company? Ed and I would go out on our hands and knees to Disney once a year. We started back in '76 and we went every year, secret trip, because we were working for somebody else. And say, are you guys ready to do this? And they would always say no, there'd be some. I remember the first trip, it was, can you boys do bubbles? No, we can't do bubbles. Okay, well, obviously you're not ready. So we came back this year with bubbles, and then it was smoke, I think, that year. And they didn't get the idea that once you could do it with a computer, you could do anything. We already had that. We understood Moore's Law intuitively. It was hard to get across. By the way, Disney was being run by a football player at the time. His qualification was that he was married to Disney's daughter. But anyhow, we kept selling, going out, making these pilgrimages and telling Disney, we can do it. We can change your whole industry. We can digitize everything we do except the art. And in one of these visits, we met this kid, John Lasseter, and snapped him up as fast as we could. As soon as Disney fired him, we snapped him up. But then, so the football player got thrown out finally, and Michael Eisner and Frank Wells were brought in. And 1 month after that change, they knocked on our door at Lucasfilm and said, we want you guys to digitize our process like you always said you could. We said, okay. And we did. We built a system for them called CAPS, the Computer Animation Production System. And for their this is for 2D cell style animation, where the art is still done by artists drawing on paper. But we took everything after that and did it digital. So the first movie I got used in was Rescuers Down Under, and then every single movie after that was done on the system. Disney kept the secret for a long time. But this is how I negotiated this deal with Disney. It took me 18 months, ferocious negotiators. But we formed a mutual admiration society, the Lucasfilm Group and the Disney Corporation, because our system outperformed what we said it would. We came in sooner than we said it would. It cost what we said it would. And they had, their part was to do the logistics system, and they overperformed on their part. So they were just this, I already said, a mutual admiration society. And it won an Academy Award. And then one more thing happened at Lucasfilm that was important. That was, we're still waiting for the big break to make the first movie, right? We weren't quite there yet, but we didn't know whether we were ready or not. Where are the machines? Are they fast enough yet? We didn't know now. And a company from Japan called Shogakukan, a very large printing company, showed up and said, we want to make the very first computer animated movie. We'll fund it. We want you guys to make it. And we'd like to base it on Journey to the West. How many people here know Journey to the West? Probably people of Asian ethnicity. You know what? I think a lot of people in Asia grow up with this as their childhood stories. It features several characters. It's about a monk going from China to India to bring back the holy text of Buddhism, to establish Buddhism as the official religion in China. But there are these tales, thousands of tales, that arose about that pilgrimage. And so there's the monk, the Dhaka, there's a character called Monkey or Sultan, there's another Piggy or something like that. There's another character. There are 4 characters. But Monkey is a really great character. He's godlike. He's a god. He's got godlike powers, but he's too young, so he keeps blowing it. So that's sort of the basis of all the stories. I was already in love with Monkey. I'd been to China in 1978, and I came back loaded with many volumes of Monkey stories. And I couldn't believe it that here came this company, and they wanted that to be the first movie. And we got a long ways into it. John Lasseter started designing character sketches for Monkey. We did marketing studies. We did story treatments. We held at Carmel by the Sea. This Japanese company would just put us up at a fabulous resort. We would brainstorm the movie. And something came to the point where it started to get serious, right? And I said, well, I got to sit down and write a contract to put money to it. And how much? What are we going to charge these guys? And I did it. I ran the numbers, and all of a sudden it hit me that we weren't there yet. Moore's Law needed to turn another 5 years. We needed another order of magnitude to increase computer power. I had to go and back out of the deal. And it was, I said the numbers are, it was $50 million, which was way too much for a movie at that time, about 3 times too much. And it was going to take 3 years, that was the killer, to produce it. So he said, okay, we've got to wait 5 years. Something happened about then. George Marshall Lucas got divorced. And that means half of George's fortune went away overnight. And I went into my buddy Ed Campbell and I said, George never really understood us. He's just lost half his fortune. We can't afford our group of 40 anymore. Let's start a company. Now this is 2 nerds saying this to each other, right? No business experience whatsoever. And Ed agreed, and we walked across the store. I mean, we really did this. We walked across the store. It was in Marin County, Larkspur bookstore, and bought How to Start Company books. I bought 2, and he bought 2 others. And so we had this idea. Lucasfilm was all for it. They saw, maybe we can make some money out of these guys after all. So off the computer graphics group. And then but there's one problem, money. Who's going to fund this thing? So we hit Sand Hill Road. Ed and I interviewed every venture capital firm on Sand Hill Road. Remember, it was a great, we were lucky. Since we were Lucasfilm, we were sexy enough to get in the door of the VCs on Sand Hill Road. But we were also very naive, so we had to learn how to talk the talk, lust for money and all that. But every single VC, everyone you ever heard of, kissed us off. We were just we didn't fit their formulas. We were 40 people, we had a prototype machine already. By the way, we're going to have to be a hardware company because it was still 5 years before the computers would be powerful enough for them. So we had to be a hardware company, that's the only thing that would pay for 40 people. And we had built this prototype machine for George to use in the studio. So the idea was to turn that into a product, to be called the Pixar image computer, by the way. And then we decided, okay, the VC, that route doesn't work. Let's try to find a strategic partner amongst large corporations. And we shopped 15 different large corporations. And we almost closed the deal with General Motors. The Ross Perot, H. Ross Perot division of General Motors. Remember him?
Yeah.
Thank God this fell through. It was so close to a deal that everybody's head was shaking yes in a big, giant boardroom, 40th floor in New York City. 4 different parties. The Phillips of the Netherlands was the 4th party. So there were about 20 people around this giant table, half attorneys. And I remember having the most painful stress headache of my entire life because I knew my future is being decided right here, right now in this room. At the end of the day, a very long day, everybody's head is shaking yes, and the handshakes happen, and in the business world, it's a done deal. To within signing the papers, attorneys have to go right up. It's just been agreed. But it's a done deal. But not this time. This time, H. Ross Perot, bless his heart, was uptown at the General Motors building insulting the board of directors of General Motors, calling them fools for having bought used tools. That story broke the next day in the Wall Street Journal, and everybody knew instantaneously anything that had to do with Perot and General Motors was dead. So at that point, Ed and I said, oh God, we were desperate. Lucasfilm was desperate. We tried everything. I failed to mention that one of the guys that came by early on and got laughed out of the place was Steve Jobs. He had been thrown out of Apple already. He invited Ed and me down to his west side estate, and he said, I'd like to buy you and run you. No, we want to run it, but we'll take your money. And he said, okay, and he ran a number of guys with us, and they just laughed him out of the room because it was like 1/3 of what General Motors was going to pay. General Motors fell apart, everybody's frantic, so Ed and I decided we'd just call Steve and say, make the same deal again, make the same offer again. And he did, and they took it. Lucasfilm took it. So that's how we got Steve Jobs to be our venture capitalist. And these are the founding documents of Pixar. You hear us said all the time that Steve bought it from Lucasfilm. No, he didn't. He funded a spin out of the corporation. It's a standard startup mechanism in Silicon Valley. He, since he provided all the money, he got majority ownership for his stock, and he wrote us 2 checks, us being head and for representing the new corporation. First $5 million we turned immediately over to Lucasfilm to buy rights to all the technology that we were taking with us. And the next $5 million was to capitalize the new startup. Okay. So I'd like, that story's told wrong so many times, I'd like to sort of hammer it in. We had already had the idea for a decade to start how to make the first computer-generated movie. We already had John Lasseter hired. We had already been on the big screen. We already had a deal that won an Academy Award with Disney. I already had a piece in the MoMA. So you can see why I get a little uptight when I hear that it was all Steve Jobs' idea. Steve Jobs' idea was the money. He used the money, and I thank him very much for that money. That's what made Pixar possible. But that's all he did. He showed up every 10 years for the initial financing, for the IPO. As one of his smartest businessman moves. He was a brilliant businessman. He decided to take the company public on no money in the bank, but the promise that this movie was going to be a hit, Toy Story. And he became a billionaire overnight. So it was a good move, Steve. And then he's a scary negotiator. So when the deal was made for Disney to buy Pixar, Steve was in the room. So that's where we invoked Steve. But truthfully, Ed Kaplan ran the company the whole time. And Ed's book is out right now. You may have seen it. Where he sort of takes a victory lap and says, I did it, which is all true. He did. And sure enough, after 5 years of failing as a hardware company, we did. We could not, this machine, the Pixar computer was a wonderful machine. It got left in the dust by Moore's Law. For a long you could do on the sun what you could do on this very expensive special purpose computer. And so that business failed again and again and again. But Steve, so we'd always, every time it would fail, we would go to Steve and he would write another check to keep the doors open because he did not want to be embarrassed by a failure, his first thing out of Apple. So eventually, over 5 years or so, he did own the company because he had bought all of us. And he was in the hole, half his fortune, $50 million at the time. So when he turned that overnight into $1 billion, it was quite a business coup. How am I doing on time, somebody? Wind it up? Yeah. Okay, I'll skip it. You've seen all these movies. I'd just like to say 2 more things. One is, in 2000, Scientific American asked me, what's the likelihood we'll replace human actors with computer simulations? And I said, well, none at all. We don't have a clue how to replace actors. But we do know how to replace the look of the actors. And that's going to happen sooner or later. I said this in 2000, and sure enough, the curious case of Benjamin Button came along in 2010. Moore's Law 1 billion X. One of the things that happened that year. And to me, it's the Turing test that you can put a simulation of a human being on the screen and it's totally convincing. Like, I don't even know whether this is one of the frames where he's where he's an avatar or not. It doesn't matter. The point is, you can't tell. And I went in eagle-eyed. I knew that parts of some of these Brad Pitts weren't Brad Pitts. Okay. So the actor has to do the acting, at least today. Now, there's a possibility here. I've been a fan of AI all my adult life. There is a guy named Mark Sager in New Zealand who has modeled his own child. And he has a baby's intelligence behind it. The beginnings of intelligence. They'll react to people in the room and smile and change gaze. Very primitive, but it's the first first hint that maybe another 1,000 X or Moore's law or something. He calls it baby X. So I thought, that's a good way to get my talk. Baby on one end and baby on the other. Can I just show one more picture? It's not really meant to be part of my talk, but I saw this in Science magazine yesterday. You know what this is? That's one synaptic glucon.
Say it again.
You know, we have our brains full of synapses, about 1 trillion or so. Each synapse on the dendrite are these little buttons, these little synaptic glucons they're called. That's one of them. That's a three-dimensional computer graphic model of a single synaptic glucon. And it has 600,000 parts on it. And there are 1 trillion of those in the brain at least. I just want to kind of recalibrate it maybe. What it means to understand how this thing works. All right, that's it.